Hey guys, Ryan DeMent from Chasing Happiness Podcast. Hope you guys are having a great day. Today on the podcast, we have Leslie Draffin. She's a woman's microdosing and somatic guide and a mindful mentor. Leslie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Ryan. I'm excited to be here.
You're more than welcome. So, before we get into what you're doing, can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Leslie, like you said, and in a former life, I was a TV news anchor for 15 years.
Oh, cool.
I spent a lot of time on the news across the South and mid Southwest, but I really came to my current work through my own healing journey. I realized in my mid 30s that I had spent about 20 years deeply disconnected from my body and punishing myself through things like an eating disorder, alcohol abuse, and even reliance on things like Adderall to fuel my eating disorder. And what I discovered was that it was born out of this deep wound around worthiness. And
Mm.
so I really spent a lot of my time trying to prove how worthy I was by achieving and hustling, and the outside world really applauded me for that. I was at the top of my game as a news anchor. I was making six figures, the main anchor, the executive producer role, and yet internally I still felt really bad. So I had a spiritual awakening in 2019 and really started to shift a lot of the things that I was using to cope. And I've been sober now for 18 months thanks to microdosing mushrooms and some other
Okay.
things, but psychedelics for sure.
So, when you say spiritual, how is that defined? What's the spiritual awakening that you had?
For me, I was raised really religious. My dad's a preacher in the deep south of the United States, but I no longer really ascribe to a lot of those Christian beliefs. I would say I'm very much more Christ consciousness versus some of the teachings of the very strict church that I grew up in. But my spiritual awakening, I think, really started with me connecting to the divine feminine side of spirit, of God, and really aligning with those archetypes to help me heal some of the shame that I had from um, early in my teen years, getting herpes, really feeling like I was wrong and sinful, and working towards, again, feeling like I was part of the divine within myself.
That there's a lot in there to unpack. It's great that you did that, but I think there's a lot of people that struggle with that in life. I know when I was working corporate America, I was chasing the next promotion and never was really fulfilled. I was never happy with what I just got. I was always on to the next, and it doesn't work that way. And to say that entrepreneurship has been a struggle for the last 8 years, 9 years, yeah,
Mhm.
but I'm at least being fulfilled with what I wanna do and how I wanna do it, and I don't think we as humans actually sit back and say, "What are we gonna do to fulfill ourselves or to help others?"
Mhm.
Whether you're religious, spiritual, whatever, we're humans, we wanna connect with one another and be able to help, and I think a lot of that is lost.
Yeah. And I can totally relate because in television, you're really working on a contract basis. So we do 2 years, 1 spot, 3 years, 1 spot, 2 years. So in 15 years, I had 5 different jobs. And when I left TV in 2022, because my mental health was suffering so significantly, I'd been diagnosed with PTSD that year. Anxiety and depression had been something I had really battled with probably for most of my adult life. I really had to look deeply at what my belief system was around success and around my worth and my purpose here, because when I checked out of my dream job, because it had been my dream job since I was in 5th grade, when I left that, since it become such a nightmare for me, I had a deep period of grieving. I had a deep period of just feeling lost. And even though I was already working in the coaching space at that time, it's been a big adjustment to learn to finally rest, which I feel like is a very feminine quality that I needed to learn because I was always in my masculine energy, especially as a news anchor. And so learning to rest and allow and receive versus push and strive, huge lessons for me.
When you say rest, can we go into a little bit of that? Because I know I struggle with rest and being ta I view it as 1, downtime, but 2, I'm more of a pleaser and I wanna make sure I take care of everyone. And I know that is part of my downtime is when my plate's full, I have to say no. And
Yeah.
it's taken me I turned 50 this year, and it took me this long to figure that out.
Yeah. I think rest means a lot of different things to different people. If my husband were to answer the question, he would say his rest is going to the gym. Like, dude, okay, whatever. To each their own, my love. For me, what I had to do, and I did this in early 2023, I had to force myself to stop creating, to stop feeling like I could fill, because this is my thing. When I felt uncomfortable feelings, I would do things like produce a whole online course or record a podcast series in order to escape from those uncomfortable feelings. And so I really had to force myself to press pause. And so I lived for 8 weeks with this intention of I take my precious time. And I
Mm.
would look at time as precious and look at things I could do to fill the time in beautiful and precious ways. So, art, spending time outside. I live in Texas, so January, February, pretty nice time, with the exception of 1 or 2 weeks that we might have a little bit of nasty weather. But I became a bird watcher. That's like such a cliche about what happens in your late 30s as you become interested in birds. And so I really had to force myself to look at ways in which I could live the width of my life instead of moving toward that linear achievement pattern of what can I create, and look at why I was feeling like I had to create so much. And it was because I felt uncomfortable with where I was in my life.
It's tough. One of the things that I've had a couple guests on the show, and I really wanna see if I can be able to do it, is they go to silent retreats for 3 to 5 days and
Mhm.
just really disconnect from the world altogether. And I had a guest on where she actually goes to a silent retreat with other people, and you can't talk to them. You literally you go to your room, read, do whatever you gotta do. When you eat, you guys eat as a community, but you don't get to talk. And it's okay. That's a little weird for me. I understand the silent disconnect and be on
Mhm.
your own, but when you have people there and you can't talk to them, that's a little difficult. But I like the bird watching. I live out in Arizona. It's too dang hot during the summertime, but in the once we're starting to cool down. We're not quite there yet in September, probably later in the month. Is my dog Moose love to go take him to the park, run and walk and stuff like that in the middle of the day, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Just go enjoy that. And that's just really good downtime.
Yeah.
I got a question here. I know that was a long diatribe. The We tend to not do that for ourselves, disconnect, have that silent time. What would be 3 nuggets you could share that you've done or you've seen others do that could help somebody like myself or listeners to be able to do that in their
Mm.
lives on a daily basis?
I think we can start looking at rest in a different light. I think our society puts rest in this category of laziness because we place so much emphasis on the doing and the achieving. So maybe you could first start by reframing what rest looks like to you. Could it look like pleasure? Could it look like fun? Could you stop thinking of rest as napping and doing things that might for you still feel a little lazy, and instead put things into that rest period that you really like doing? So, like my husband, he likes to go to the gym. Maybe you could go for a walk with Moose. Maybe you can take
Mm,
a bath versus a shower. That was one thing
yeah.
I did early in my transition into this. I stopped taking showers. I only took baths because
Mm,
it forced me to be slower. Everything was a little slower. So maybe that's something. The other thing I would say, or other than reframing the way you look at rest, is I guess setting up your life and your world for rest. So getting rid of distractions whenever you can. For me, that's clutter. And I know that's a basic thing, clean your house a little bit, but I would feel so much more harried in my mind and anxious in my mind and too quick and fast in my mind and I have clutter in this room right now. So I need to take my own advice. So maybe doing something to cleanse the physical space you're in so that it feels peaceful and restful too. And then the last thing is getting into your body and understanding that a lot of the thoughts and emotions and feelings that live in your head are sensations that began in your body. And so if you can tackle those types of things like your anxiety or your like that itchiness you get when you're supposed to be resting, but you just can't settle down.
Yeah.
Looking for somatic practices, breathwork is one that I'm obsessed with that can really help to level your body out so that you can then give yourself space to rest.
That's a struggle because I know, like, this past weekend, it was like a 3-day weekend. I'm like, "Okay, I need to take some downtime and really just relax, rest, recharge." And Saturday, I had a little bit of a challenge with it, but come Sunday and Monday, I really disconnected and didn't have to worry about much of anything.
Mhm.
But I had that restlessness
Yeah.
going on. I should be doing something. And that's when I tried something I normally don't do. I read a lot, but I started when I felt that way, I started reading a book, and
Uh-huh.
it took my mind off of being restless and helped a little bit. But the struggle is real, man. The
And
struggle is totally real.
and I also love what you said. It's like you had a 3-day weekend, you should rest. Shoulding is like the worst thing we can do to ourselves. Shoulding is for sure the worst thing we can do to ourselves, thinking that we have to do this thing and putting rest on a to-do list. There are so many folks out there that are like, schedule your rest or schedule this part of your self-care into your routine. For me, that was something that made me more anxious. When am I going to get to this? Oh, shoot, I didn't do it well enough. I didn't do it long enough. And so it is really tricky. That's also, I think, part of this whole phrase, the Sunday scaries. I think that part of Sunday scaries comes from this idea that you should have felt rested and rejuvenated over the weekend so that you can go back into your life and start to hustle. But if we can find little tiny pockets of rest that we naturally gravitate to daily, make it playful, make it full of pleasure, make it feel good, then maybe eventually it won't be this thing we only look to do on the weekends that we feel we should do, and it can become a more natural part of our everyday life.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge I have is I need to naturally make it be part of my daily life, not just Saturday and Sunday, like you
Yeah.
said. And um, oh my gosh, the book I wanted to just talk about, and I'm drawing a blank. Oh my God. Um, It'll come to me. But anyhow, stacking my wins and actually stacking what I actually do on a daily basis, like in the mornings, waking up early, I journal and I get out and walk and so forth and just do those. It's like muscle memory.
Mhm.
And that's what I've started to do to rest and disconnect is I have to find a pattern that works for me because sometimes during the day it doesn't work. But somewhere around 3 o'clock, I know that I can actually stop, disconnect, just level set my mind and move forward. I guess my next, not guess. I'm gonna jump all around because I'm all over the place right now.
I wanna just say one thing really quickly about what you just
Okay.
mentioned, because when I first started my spiritual practice, I had a really long routine that I
Okay.
felt that I needed to do. Like, I would listen to a meditation, and then I would journal, and then I would go for a walk, and I'd listen to a podcast, and I would habit stack these things that were self-care. What ended up happening is I got burnt out of my self-care routine because it was way too long. So just be aware and mindful of when your process of getting into that rest zone starts to feel a little like work, can you just do less? Just do less.
Yes. And the name of the book is Atomic
Atomic
Habits.
Habits, I thought it might be.
Yeah. My gosh. I've read it like 4 times. No, I agree because one of the things that I like to do in the evening is read, and I'm pushing myself to read more books, and when I get to that point of, "Okay, I'm reading too much," I know I've gotta back off, and I've done that. The other thing that you brought up earlier is, you're microdosing with mushrooms.
Yeah.
How can that play into rest and be able to help us get into that state?
For folks who might not be familiar with what microdosing mushrooms is, it's when you take a teeny tiny amount of psychedelic mushrooms, so small that you're not tripping, hallucinating, but you're still able to get some of these really beautiful benefits of things like neuroplasticity. The way I see mushrooms in a microdose helping to promote rest is one, there's this beautiful art that happens around ingesting this sacred medicine that I think can really help to level the nervous system out and also make life more beautiful. It can make life harder too. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It can make things tricky. But for me, the longer I sat with this practice, the more I wanted to watch the birds outside, the more I wanted to hang out with my dog. Like, all of the lessons around rest can be learned from your pet. Like, your pet
Yeah.
will show you what's up. Like, when they go for a walk and they're sniffing everything, that's literally what they want us to do, is to notice, right? And I think that microdosing helps us notice within ourselves where we might be unbalanced and when we can really be intentional, because that's the way that I practice it and the way that I help with clients is finding intention behind your practice. And so if rest is your intention, finding the things that feel juicy to you, that feel beautiful and fun to you, and using those as a form of rest. The other reason I think that microdosing really helps us learn to rest is because it helps point out the reasons why we think we can't. It helps to
Mm.
show us our shadows. And so if you have a belief in your subconscious that you're not worthy of rest, that you need to do, speaking from my own experience, that you need to do things to be loved, if you need to prove to the outside world how great and how valuable you are, mushrooms are going to show that to you pretty dang brightly and make it uncomfortable. And so while while you're seeing those things, I look at it as like connecting the dots. Oh, I behave this way because this is that internal belief. I think it also really helps to show you ways that you can promote balance.
The thought of resting scares people,
Mhm.
and I'm going down a little bit of a different path again, I'm all over the place, and people are challenged by that, but then they also at the same time and the questions in here is this: how do they know what will actually allow them to rest? Because some people are they're not happy in life, and I'm gonna put this all over top of it and tied up in a bow. If you're not happy in life, you don't know what makes you happy,
Yeah.
how are you gonna be able to rest and be able to reconnect if you don't know where your life is going or what passions you have? So, those individuals that are struggling with kind of an overall picture of life, how can mushrooms help? Are there other things that can be done? It's a broad question, but it just came to my head and I'm like, yeah, this is going to be something good to talk about.
One of the very first things that I did, because I was absolutely in this boat, I was still in TV. It was the pandemic. Life was as stressful as it's ever been. I don't remember where I saw this, but I made a list of every little thing that made me happy. And I'm talking, I got down to the minutia of this shirt feels really good on my body. This candle smell, not that candle smell sucks, but this candle smell I love. Comfort TV shows, books that I had really loved. And I made this, there must have been 50 things on this list. It took me a while to make it, but the tiniest things up to bigger things, right? Taking a vacation, taking a bath, right? Like bath was on the list. And so I started to, when I would feel uncomfortable in my body, when I felt like I had this internal pull to do when I felt so exhausted, I would look at the list and think, what one thing can I do? All right, let me light this candle that I love. I have Palo Santo right here. It's one of my favorite scents. I would smell that and I'd take a bath. I would pick a couple of things from the menu of the happiness list. And I found that the more often that I chose those tiny little nuggets, maybe it was switching out what I had for breakfast, maybe it was having a juicy piece of fruit. The more I got used to allowing myself to pick from the happiness list, the more it became a habit. And naturally, I felt like the more happy I got and the more rest I was also achieving. Because for me, being happy is can be really restful because we're looking at rest in a different light, right? It can be nourishing. Happiness is nourishing. Rest is nourishing. And so what we want is to find ways that nourish us, whether you're looking at that as rest or you're looking at that as play or things that make you happy. For folks who are afraid of that or who feel really resistant to it, they're probably the ones who need it the most. I was certainly that person.
Mhm.
And I think mushrooms can absolutely be a beautiful tool to assist you in giving yourself the space to look at the happy list. Because for me, I was always this person, even in the beginning of 2019 and 2020, when I was first on this path of really trying to get sober and heal my body image issues and all of this chatter in my head of my anxiety. I knew the thing I should do, but I just didn't do it. And when I finally started working with psychedelics in early 2022, I just found that they opened up almost like a time portal and I started to have more time to do things. Now, maybe that was just because I started to see everything in my life that was no longer aligned and start to cut it out, AKA my job. Not saying you're going to quit your job, but it was time. Alcohol, other things like being around certain people who didn't nourish me. And as I started to make these cuts, naturally there was more time. But I think with all of this, and I love this conversation, it's one that I haven't really gotten to have very often. I think the truest part of all of this is if you think you don't have enough time or you feel like you're not worthy of it or you've got other things that are more important to do, then you should probably make a happiness list and start really trying to just 2 minutes, 3 minutes, little by little, finding something that's gonna bring you joy. And if you're somewhere in your life where you can't think of one thing that brings you joy, if you can't think of 5 things that bring you joy, that's probably a great time to seek some professional help
Yeah.
and really start to look at what your life does look like. There's certainly folks out there that have it so incredibly tough. Maybe there is nothing that brings them joy, but I've seen folks who look as if they've got nothing and they still have a smile on their face. So I think it's really about mindset versus anything else.
It is mindset, and the individuals that feel they can't be happy about life, you're right, they need some help, but also need to figure out, like you said, the layer of the onions need the of the onion need to be peeled back. Man, I can't speak today. Peeled back and understand where you're at, because if you don't understand where you're at in life, where are you gonna go?
Yeah.
And that's just me being hard on myself, because that's how I look at it, is if I can't figure out what I'm doing or why I'm doing it, it needs to be removed at
And
that
I
point.
yeah, and I think that's one of the greatest parts of psychedelic work, of intentional use of psychedelics, be it at a micro level or even on a full dose. It's this ability to see within the subconscious and really, when you're committed to the work, understand what you've gotta let go of. Microdosing, I think, feels like you've got a dark closet into your subconscious and they give you a flashlight and you look the flash the flashlight around and you're seeing all the little things and you're like, "Oh, there's a bookshelf in this closet and there's the book of my unworthiness and there's the book of my self-hatred and there's the book of my busyness." And so you can see them one at a time when you're looking at with the flashlight. You're not gonna just turn on the whole light. A full dose journey will turn that whole light on. And so you'll see everything real quick. Both can be really lovely, and I certainly have explored both aspects. But what I find about the microdosing when it comes to, like you were saying, seeing what needs to be looked at, you like can use that microdose and that flashlight analogy, pulling the book off the shelf, take it out of the subconscious into the conscious, work on it for a while, leave it out of the subconscious. Go back in there, open the door, use your flashlight, point it around at what you're ready to look at, pull it out of the closet and come into the consciousness to work on it. It can certainly help make things easier. And again, doing the work in the conscious can be tricky. And that's why people like me exist to help folks who need a little bit of support.
All this takes action too. You gotta be able to step forward and take action, but I love that. We're coming to the bottom of the hour here. A couple questions. Are you currently working or going to work with new clients?
I am. Yes, I'm working with new clients and I'm actually expanding the client I work with. So
Okay.
I have been working exclusively with women for my entire 3.5, 4 years of work. And I've really felt called recently to expand into military veterans. My husband's a
Nice.
veteran.
Love it.
Several of my brother-in-laws are veterans. I work with veterans in a different capacity with another side job that I have. And I have found that there are a lot of similarities between people who are leaving the military and women in midlife who I've been working with. So I'm expanding into that aspect. And I'm also expanding into the somatic side of coaching. What I've noticed is sometimes people come to me wanting to microdose, wanting to work with psychedelics, and they are just not quite ready. Maybe it's because of some struggles they're going through. Maybe it's because they don't feel rested and grounded enough. So, I have a new aspect of work where we can start with somatics. We can start with things like helping you feel mindful, helping you create actionable steps to feel more at ease in your body. And then, if you're ready for microdosing afterwards, it's like the first step. I've added that in versus diving straight into psychedelics, which can be great for
Love
some
it.
folks.
Yeah, that's you gotta step in and try it out and see what happens. Best place for somebody to reach out to you if they wanna work with you?
So the best place, I'd love to just give you the link to book a call. You can book a free one-on-one discovery call if you want to add that to show notes. I'm
Yeah.
on Instagram, and we know the algorithm doesn't always love the taboo things I like to talk about, but at Leslie Draffin is where you can find me. And then you can also find me on my website, lesliedraffin.com.
Awesome. I will put those in the show notes for you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you very much for coming on. Love what you're doing and your perspective. You're willing to take it head on, where some struggle with that. And it's refreshing to hear your struggles, but how you're overcoming them and you work with them every single day
Mm,
instead of, unfortunately, I've done this many times, put my head in the sand and it doesn't work.
yeah. Yeah, I think that all of us, the journey of healing is a circular journey.
Hmm.
Sometimes you come back to the things that you thought you were done with and you put your head in the sand again. And I've certainly been there. But I think what I would love folks to hear is you don't have to do it alone. It can feel really isolating to feel like you're looking at this stuff that isn't very fun to look at. So much so that you do feel like you need to put your head in the sand, and so you can always reach out to someone for support, and I hope you find that person.
Thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.